Funding for the Maddy Report is made possible by grants from the California Emerging Technology Fund, leaders in the quest for digital equity. The James Irvine Foundation, committed to a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. Fresno State Associated Students, Inc., students serving students. BNSF Railway, moving our economy for 160 years. And The Wonderful Company. The Maddy Report is also made possible thanks to contributions from Harris Ranch Inn and Restaurant and E&J Gallo Winery. From the Maddy Institute, the Public Policy Institute for the Valley's 4 public universities, this is the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
You've probably heard the saying, whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting. Some, perhaps erroneously, attribute that saying to Mark Twain, but according to our guest Dan Walters, the longtime political columnist, quote, whatever its source, it accurately describes California's decades-long conflicts over this existential liquid. After a lifetime of observing California politics and water politics in particular, we'd like to get his perspective on where we've been and where we're going on this very controversial issue, and particularly California's perpetual water wars. Welcome back to the Maddy Report, Dan.
Thank you very much, Mark.
So when were you first introduced to the water wars?
Well, I was the editor of the paper in Hanford, not exactly a suburb of Fresno, but close to Fresno, back in the 1960s. And I first became aware of this thing called water. I mean, water in the biggest sense. And in that particular county, Kings County, there was a conflict between the small farmers in the north part of the county, mostly orchardists, and the big, huge corporate farms in the south part of the county over rights to the Kings River, water on the Kings River. And the small farmers were afraid that the big farmers were going to buy up all the water rights on the Kings River and leave them high and dry. So they actually formed a county agency to buy up water rights to keep them from going to the South County. And it was kind of, again, an introduction to the idea that water, how important water is, particularly in the agricultural community. Water is money. Water is life, and business life and personal life. And, that was my introduction, but nothing's happened to change all that ever since. We're still fighting over it.
I was going to ask you about the combatants, in water, ag, environmentalists, urban. I mean, does anyone have more power than the other?
Yes, in a sense that the urban uses, in other words, the drinking water that would always have first priority if you start divvying up water. But that's not very much water. Truthfully, it's really a pretty small part of the water picture in California. The biggest chunks of water are either consumed by agriculture or flow down the rivers and streams into the ocean. Those are the big chunks. The water that's used by human beings for watering lawns, drinking water, taking bath showers, all the sort, everything that it's a pretty small. It's about, on an average year, about 5% of the water that actually falls on California is snow or rain. So it's not a big thing. The big battle over water is really how much goes to the agriculture and how much goes to the natural environment.
Has the political power shifted over time as California's population has grown? Has it shifted away from agriculture and toward urban uses or domestic uses?
Well, not necessarily to urban uses, domestic uses, but there has been a shift between agriculture and environment, starting with when the environmental movement really got started in the 1970s. That was one of the fronts on the movement, was how water's divvied up between agriculture and habitat. Let's call it habitat. In other words, water in the rivers and in the delta that support fish life and so forth. And that has been the essential battle that's been going on now for about, half a century or so, I would say.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, in a typical year, we've got good years and bad years, dry years and wetter years. Is there enough water in California to satisfy all the demands on water, whether it's agriculture or the environment or urban centers? Is there a political consensus that there's enough water in California to satisfy all those needs?
No, there's not. There's enough water to take care of the so-called human use. There's not enough water to meet the demands of agriculture and the environmental water, let's call it. And so, no, and that's the battle. That's the almost the entire battle is that. How much water is going to go downstream and how much water is going to be pumped out of the rivers and whatnot or captured in reservoirs and pumped out of the rivers for agricultural purposes.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting. The PPIC noted recently that annual water supplies could decline by as much as 20% by 2040. And they're talking about something like 3.2 million acre feet, which is the size of the Oroville Dam that we could lose just because of climate change and the rest of it.
Yeah, and that's what's going on. Under the best of circumstances, apparently, I mean, this is all speculation, of course. Under the best of circumstances, California will not see less precipitation than it's gotten, but its precipitation will be more erratic year to year and probably more in the form of rain and less in the form of snow, which means that the natural reservoir of the snowpack in the Sierra will probably decline over time because we would get not as much snow, but maybe more rain. That's under the best of circumstances. The worst of circumstances is there would be, as noted, a overall decline in the amount of precipitation into California in toto. Now, given that,
I want to talk about that in a second. We're running up against a clock here on this particular segment, but I do want to talk about that, and particularly this perpetual water crisis. What's the problem here? Is it a lack of vision? Is it a lack of political will? Is it unwillingness to compromise? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. If my numbers are correct, our guest has written over 10,000 columns on California politics. We're talking with Dan Walters, a columnist with CalMatters and longtime observer of state politics generally and water issues in particular. So you've written that, quote, California's current water supply system, or more accurately, its dozens of federal, state, and local systems, dates back to the early decades of the 20th century, when the state was emerging from its frontier status into an agricultural and later industrial powerhouse. Can you give us a quick history lesson?
Yeah, well, the early pioneers to California were mostly farmers. There were the gold miners, of course, but that was a whole different thing. But the California was settled basically by farmers, and they just used water that they found in the rivers and whatnot, or cultivated dry crops. Wheat was the crop of choice in the 19th century. But by and by, as the state grew and everything, there had to be kind of some organization to it. And in 1915, the state started really trying to regulate water and water rights. And so one of the cardinal factors in water in California today are water rights, those that predate 1915 and those that come after 1915, and then, of course, those who don't have any water rights at all. And the summation of who gets water and who doesn't get water depends a lot on those rights, not only on the amount of water that's available, but who's at the top of the list when they get it. That has to do with water rights because they're done chronologically. And there is some resistance to that. There's a lot of resistance now to the idea of why should we follow what happened in the 19th century or the early 20th century as to who got water, because this is the 21st century and we need to do the whole thing over again. And that's where the rubber hits the road in water in California when you start dealing with water rights.
Yeah. By the way, just a little footnote. I think it was Clovis Cole, the city of Clovis was named after, was the wheat king of California back in the day, 100 years ago, apparently. A big part of California's water system and infrastructure is created by Pat Brown's state water plan in the 50s and 60s. But you've written that, quote, it's fair to say that almost every river in the state and some streams too small to be called rivers have been dammed for local or distant use, unquote. Indeed, the biggest regional dam, I think, was built back in like 1980. But you regularly hear about, we're going to build a new dam, the Sites Reservoir or Temperance Flat. Is building a new dam a pipe dream?
No, I think that it's the Sites Reservoir, at least, is an active project. It's been on kind of in the works for about 40 years, but there seems to be picking up a lot of steam in recent years. Some money has been appropriated. And the important thing about Sites Reservoir is it's an off-stream reservoir up on the west side of the Sacramento Valley. In other words, it doesn't dam a river. It just sits out there in the middle of nowhere. And then when
that's supposed to have less environmental impact. Is that it?
Well, it has a tremendously less environment, because you're not talking about migrating fish or anything like that. You're just talking about water. It's very similar to the San Luis project up in the hills west of Merced. It's an off-stream reservoir that you pump water into it when it's available, and you put water out of it when you need it. And that reservoir is gaining a lot of traction. I don't think there's really any real major on-river projects that have a chance of making it anymore. But off-stream reservoirs, that's a possibility.
Just to give you an idea, I was doing some reading on this, and they're saying that sites would bring on 1.5 million acre feet, and we can talk about what acre feet is, but acre feet of water by coming on stream, as it were, online. The state currently has 50 million acre feet per water, so about 3% increase in water capture if you bring sites online. I want to ask you, since building dams and reservoirs has been a bit of a challenge, been very politically challenging, is that why we're hearing so much about the Delta conveyance projects over the years?
Well, the Delta Conveyance Project, whatever, it gets changed. Its name changes every few years, but now called the Delta Conveyance, which would be a pipeline underneath Sacramento San Joaquin Delta. The Delta, you have to understand, is the hinge point of the entire water controversy. It has to do with the Delta. That's where the Sacramento and the San Joaquin rivers come together. Of course, all the tributaries to those two rivers forming this estuary between the San Joaquin Valley, Sacramento, and the bay. And the water flows through the Delta into the bay. And the real controversy is how much water can you take out of those tributaries or out of the Delta itself, because the State Water Project and one of the federal projects takes water right out of the bottom of the Delta near Tracy and ships it down south, down to the farmers, down to Southern California. And so the Delta is kind of the place where the entire battle comes together. And the conveyance would essentially bypass the Delta for a good deal of the water coming down the Sacramento River. And so it's a project that has been in the works.
It's another one of those political battles. But up next, we're going to talk about another political battle. That's groundwater. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. Now, groundwater pumping is, of course, another major source of water for California, but it's created some significant environmental challenges. In 2014, the legislature took the first steps to limiting the use of groundwater with the passage of the State Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, that has the goal of creating groundwater sustainability by 2040. Has big implications, obviously, for Valley agriculture. We're talking with Dan Walters, longtime political columnist, about water politics. So, state's pretty reliant on groundwater. What are some of the adverse consequences of groundwater pumping?
Well, groundwater supplies about a third of the water in California, and it's particularly important, as you say, to agriculture, because it's kind of been a safety valve for agriculture. When the surface water has been unavailable during droughts, farmers have pumped water out of the underground to keep their crops watered. But as you say, it's now going to be under regulation, so that the underground supply, I guess, could be squeezed. Now, it's also possible to increase the underground supply by sinking water when it's available, but that's still it hasn't really gelled yet. The important thing is that the pumping out of the underground supplies, out of the aquifers, has resulted in what's called subsidence of the ground actually dropping, falling, caving in on these aquifers, which, by the way, makes them less able to then be replenished.
You're talking about the canals that are they're dropping. They're putting some money to repair some of these, but you're right, you're losing all the water because the canals are actually.
Yeah, the canals have been, but the land itself has been subsiding. I mean, the farmland itself.
Well, let me ask you this, Dan. The target is 2040. Is that too much too soon or too little too late?
It may be too little too late. The environmental groups are saying that they need to jack that up, because very recently, just right now, farmers are pumping water out of that aquifer because they at the moment it's not yet regulated. And the environmental groups say if you don't crack down soon, there's not going to be water to pump. And so there's
the flip side of that. The flip side of that is, of course, farmers or ag will say, well, listen, if we can't do this pumping, we're going to have to fallow land. So if they have to fallow their land, lose up to 500,000 or more acres of active farmland, what's the state doing to make sure that the farmers are taken care of in that situation?
Well, they're not doing anything at the moment. There are things kicking around in academia like, well, this farmland could become solar panel farms or something like that, but it's all theoretical at the moment. And it seems likely that land will be fallowed, in high quantities of land will be fallowed, not only because of the underground situation, but because of reductions in surface water as well. Agriculture in California is undergoing a major evolution right now in terms of the crops that it can grow, in terms of how much land it can be watered. It's going to shift land that's now farms marginal crops, maybe like alfalfa. It's going to have to give way to the more high value crops like almonds and grapes, because you can't let those almond and grape orchards go fallow. There's no such thing as fallowing them. They have to have water.
Well, is that the other side of that equation? So we have to have more, people say you have to have more row crops and less permanent crops like almonds. Even though row crops don't bring the return on investment that almonds do.
That's it. It's an economic thing. Almonds are a very valuable crop. They provide a lot of money to the farm community. They're exported all over the world. California is the prime source of almonds for the entire world. What do you do about that? That's high value stuff. That brings in a lot of money, unlike some of the row crops. And it's an evolutionary thing that's going on right now. And the whole nature of farming in California is going to be changing dramatically over the next couple of decades, as it has in the past. It changed a lot from when it was basically wheat back in the 19th century. So but it's going to be painful, and there's land that's going to go fallow. And should the state buy up that land? Should the state be paying the farmers to fallow their land? Should the federal government be paying the farmers to fallow their land? It's all up in the air right now.
Yeah, well, climate change is going to have a big impact on all this. And the question is that going to be the impetus that creates the political will to solve California's seemingly intractable water problem? We'll have that conversation in a moment. Welcome back. This is Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Dan Walters, longtime columnist and observer of California politics, about water politics. You've written that one of your chief concerns is the absence of strong leadership when it comes to California water policy. So who should be leading here? The governor, the legislature, the regulatory agencies, the courts, academia, all of the above?
Well, it's probably all of the above, but I think the governor plays a particularly central role in the water issue. I mean, to resolve California's water conflicts is going to take some legislation, some law changes. It might even include doing away with water rights or changing water rights. That happened in Australia, by the way. So yeah, the governor plays the role, but it's difficult because water policy is glacial. It takes years, decades to make a significant change in water policy in California, but governors come and go maybe every 8 years. So just as when one guy goes out, then the next guy comes in and changes the whole thing over. I mean, look, that's why the Delta Conveyance has had so many names over the years. Every governor comes in, changes the project and changes the name.
And some governors change it twice, right? Governor Brown, he changed it, from the peripheral canal to the Twin Tunnels project, and in his two iterations as governor.
The big fix.
The big fix. That's right. So depending on whoever leads this issue, we're going to have to increase the political will to deal with the water crisis. But we're talking about things like a number of things, conservation, conveyance, storage, pricing. How do we increase the civic awareness on this issue?
As long as you turn on the tap and water comes out to the average Californian, that's it. It begins and ends with that. Again, the basic conflicts over water don't have anything to do with the water in the tap. I think officialdom makes too much of that. They say you got to take shorter showers, you got to do this, and makes people thinking that that's the water issue. That's not the water issue. The water issue is how much goes downstream for habitat and how much the farmers can put in their fields. And it's a very complex issue involving countless numbers of stakeholders, each with a different take on the subject. And only the governor has the position to knock heads, bring them in, and try to make some hard decisions over who's going to get the water and who's not going to get the water.
But one of the things you're talking about, though, is water rights, right? And water rights are tied to land rights. You're talking about potentially a fundamental rewriting of water rights. Is that even possible, or is it practical?
It was done in Australia. They had exactly the same problem we have, and they did it in Australia. And yeah, it's possible. In fact, a lot of the environmental groups are saying you've got to do something about water rights. A very similar situation is developing on the Colorado River that feeds water into Southern California. It's virtually the same fight over how much water is going to be going here and whose rights dominate the discussion. So it's central to the whole thing. You probably cannot rationalize water policy in California without doing something about water rights, buying up water rights, paying people for their water rights, something, because it's right in the middle of the entire issue of water
and
rights.
One of the things that environmentalists point to is the state constitution, because it talks about the primacy of the public interest when it comes to water issues, and so they're saying that should compel reduced water flow to preserve, wildlife, et cetera. So, yeah, there's a lot of political and legal issues around this. But let me ask you this: we've got about a minute left, but I want to ask you this. So, you've looked at the water crisis over a number of years. Do you see this today, currently, and going forward? Is the glass half full or the glass half empty? Are you an optimist or a pessimist?
Well, you have to be an optimist because sooner or later, Mother Nature will force you to deal with it. So, at some point, not this year, not next year, maybe not even this decade, at some point, California is going to have to confront its water dilemma because Mother Nature is going to force it, just as it's forcing the issue right now on the Colorado River. And it's going to force it for the rest of California as well, simply because there's not going to be enough water to go around.
Yeah, Mother Nature is going to force the issue, force a conclusion. That's probably a good way to think about it. She always wins. I want to thank a longtime political columnist, Dan Walters, for joining us. If you want to stay current with state and local politics, you can sign up for the Maddy Daily, our e-news aggregator, but just log on to our website at maddyinstitute.org. This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about today's episode of the Maddy Report, please visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.